Good afternoon, everybody. It's Steph Halder here, President of BATOD. Emma has very helpfully just shared with you some visual instructions on how to ensure that your microphones are muted, and also if we could ask you please to turn off your cameras as well. So on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see the mute option for your microphone, and also to stop the video, please. Okay, I think the interpreter is visible, so I will start with the welcome. So welcome everybody to the first BATOD National webinar. BATOD is delighted to be able to offer the opportunity to share in this calendar year the keynote speeches which were planned to be part of the BATOD conference from March 2020. Generosity, flexibility, commitment, innovation. These were some of the key words that BATOD members used to describe the profession in a survey carried out by BATOD in May 2020. BATOD has put into place a number of plans as a result of the feedback provided by you to the survey. And one that I'd like to mention today is that BATOD has now met with a wide range of teaching and education-related trade unions across all nations. In these meetings, BATOD has had the opportunity to highlight the needs of deaf children and young people, raise awareness of the profession, and share documentation produced by BATOD in collaboration with various partners over recent months. It has also been able to highlight some key concerns as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. These include remote learning and the accessibility needs of deaf children and young people, the access of specialist services in providing their usual support to deaf children and young people in education settings and their homes, changes to the current exam system, and ensuring that deaf children and young people are considered in relation to any catch-up programmes. Use of PPE and highlighting the need for clear face coverings has been an important aspect of our conversations, and we have brought to their attention the Keep It Clear campaign of the National Deaf Children's Society, of which BATOD is a key partner. A feature of the QTOD profession is our can-do approach. And in March 2020, the professional generosity of our field was paramount, with many members sharing their online teaching and learning resources. The 4 nations have been, or are still, in various states of lockdown. However, education settings remain open. We continue to provide our support via a blended approach, and online learning remains at times a feature for all children and young people. Much has been learned since March, so do please continue to share with BATOD your ideas, resources, and success stories. In the coming days, BATOD will be asking for your views again through another short survey. The focus of this one is how deaf children and young people are being supported in their education and how you are being supported to carry out your role. BATOD appreciates your time in responding to the survey. Your input and feedback steer the priorities and work of the association, so thank you in advance for your responses. BATOD is delighted that you are engaging with this webinar, and I hope that you have found the different ways and times in which you can access the presentations to be flexible and supportive. Huge thanks to the BATOD National Conference Committee for their hard work and dedication in preparing for today. Thanks also go to our keynote speakers today, Emmie Wienhoven and Helen Willis. And we must not forget our sponsors who have also helped to make today possible. Hare, BritishSign.co.uk, Con Evans, and Medell. BATOD appreciates your continued support. Emma Parker, Chair of the BATOD National Conference Committee, is now going to go through some details to facilitate your engagement with the webinar this afternoon. Thank you, Emma.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're well. Just a little bit of housekeeping, just to read to facilitate our time together. we're going to be encouraging people, if you have questions during the viewing of the recorded keynote speeches, if you can add those to our Padlet. Teresa's going to put these links into the chat box as well. But if you can click on those and then you can add your questions. Those questions can be in the form of files, questions, and they also can be signed videos as well. And also, Emmie's PowerPoint is also available. This link will also be available in the chat if you'd like to download that so that you can follow that along whilst her presentation is being shown. And so there you go. That's all the housekeeping. We really hope that you're going to have a really interesting, stimulating time this afternoon, and look forward to networking and spending some time with you at the end of the session. Bye.
My name is Emmie Wienhoven, and I'm a project manager at Royal Dutch Cantalis. Our work at Cantalis is both in the Netherlands and internationally. In the Netherlands, we have diagnostics, care and education for people who are deaf, hard of hearing and deaf-blind, as well as those with complex communicational needs or SLI. Some of our work is international, and that's where I work, at the International Department. And I'm happy to share with you today some of our work on literacy for deaf and hard of hearing children in Tanzania and Uganda. We have a pilot project in which there's 4 phases, and those 4 phases together hope to improve or aim to improve the literacy skills of deaf and hard of hearing learners. First of all, we have a developmental stage. In that stage, we develop a method for teaching deaf and hard of hearing learners to read. This method is based on work done by my colleague Kika Mereboer for the Tanzatoto Foundation some years back already, and she developed practical skills for teachers to help children acquire reading more efficiently and more effectively. We took this practical guide and we added the theoretical background and made it a very strong and robust resource book for teachers that helps them both theoretically during training, but also in their classroom in planning their lessons. The second phase of the project involves training, and then we train reading coaches and teachers in the method. And this was a fantastic way of seeing what works and what doesn't work. And that allowed us to take those lessons back into the developmental stage. So these things don't necessarily happen one after another. We do them back and forth almost, because it's very much a dialogue. Also with the implementation, teachers took what they learned to their classroom and they received coaching from the reading coaches. And that allowed us to see what works well, what doesn't work so well, where teachers might need some extra support, where we might have given them too much support and needed to focus on something else. It also allowed us to incorporate some pictures of the materials that teachers were making in their classroom and incorporate them in the book so that for other teachers, they could look at their work of their colleagues and really get a sense of, I can do this too, because it is not that complicated as I maybe beforehand thought it was. Finally, we have a research and documentation phase. Throughout the project, we tried to document as much of what we were doing and really aim for lessons for the future and lessons for other practitioners so they could use our work and continue it and take their lessons from it in the future. But also for ourselves, what do we need to strengthen? What do we maybe need to change if we want to do a national rollout? The project runs in Uganda and in Tanzania, and that's relevant because these 2 countries teach reading in 2 different languages. In Tanzania, there is primary education instruction in Kiswahili. And that means that children learn to read in Kiswahili. In Uganda, children learn to read in English. And we really wanted these 2 countries because it allowed us to show that the reading skills or our method doesn't depend on this particular language difference. The skills work, the method works, regardless of the language of reading. Now, there is one request that we make to teachers and to our partners, and that is to start teaching reading in the language of primary education. Because what we see a lot happening for hearing children, and this is a really good development, is where they teach in the first few years in the home language, in the mother tongue. And the idea is that kids come to school with language skills already. And that allows them to use those language skills in their home language in learning to read. And then gradually, usually in the first 4 years, they swap to learning to read in English, where English becomes the full language of instruction. Now, for deaf children, this isn't a transferable skill. Being able to read in one language doesn't necessarily help you, or help you as much as it does for hearing children. So that's the only request that we make. But whether it is English or Kiswahili or any other language, the method is the method. So I want to talk a little bit about the diverse group of deaf and hard of hearing learners in these two countries, and what these classes are comprised of, and what teachers are faced with when they're teaching these kids. Now, first of all, these children don't come to school until they're 6, maybe 7, sometimes 8 or 10. And that means, especially if they're deaf, that they haven't had any language access or full language access until they enter school at this relatively late age. Sometimes they go to nursery and they might go to school at age 5, but this is a recent development that we really hope will continue because it's absolutely fantastic, but it's not something that we can rely on at the moment. So teachers might be trained in special needs education. Actually, most of them are, and many of them have basic sign language skills. Very few are absolutely fluent. And there is a limited number of deaf teachers available in these classrooms. The thing that these teachers have not learned during their training is deaf-specific reading skills. So they try to teach reading the same way to deaf and hard of hearing learners as they do to hearing learners. And I'll talk a little bit about the difficulty of that later, but this is key in why our project is so innovative and so new in a sense, and so important, because it's the first time that we really look at reading as a specific skill for deaf and hard of hearing learners, where we need specialized trained teachers. Now, the children in these classrooms are not one group. They're not all the same. Some of them are deaf, some of them are hard of hearing, varying from mild to severe hearing loss, and also the age at which they became deaf or hard of hearing differs greatly. Also, their home situation differs. Same as here, very few children have deaf parents, so will have grown up with sign language, and the majority has hearing parents. But those hearing parents have a variety of languages that they speak and use at home as well. Now, the difference, if a child only comes to school, say at age 6, the difference between a child who was deaf from birth or who became deaf at 4 or 5 is huge. Because a child who became deaf later in life already has language skills. And this is a real challenge for teachers in the classroom because they have such a diverse group that they're trying to teach. And they have to cater to all these children. So we try to make them aware of these differences, and many of them are already aware, but we really look at what are the implications for your teaching, and this is something that they found hugely helpful in trying to teach their learners and in teaching them effectively. So, what are we talking about when we talk about teaching literacy, and specifically teaching to read? We're using the simple view of reading, and that states that decoding times linguistic comprehension equals reading comprehension. And I want to talk a little bit about what these different words mean. And for some of you, this might be known, but for some of you, it might not. And because our project kind of depends on it, I do want to go through it. So, hearing children learn to read by connecting sounds to letters. They know that the letter A is connected to the sound A. And this is different in different languages, but they learn that connection, and that means that they're able to decipher what this combination of letters sounds like. And that is the skill that we call decoding. So literally translating these little scribbles on paper to sounds. Now, these combination of sounds for hearing children with knowledge of the spoken language directly sound of words that they've already heard in their life. So this is their linguistic comprehension, their knowledge of the language that is activated immediately and works during this process of decoding to help predict and eventually come up with the right word that is the word that they're trying to read. So by being able to turn these letters into sound, so by decoding, and by those sounds having meaning, because you have linguistic comprehension, you know what you read. And that means that you've achieved reading comprehension. Now for deaf and hard of hearing children, this is slightly different. Because if you have challenges hearing those sounds, you have not a solid basis, or you do not have a solid basis to link these letters to. So you see the letters, nothing wrong there, or no challenges there, but you can't link them to sounds that you know. So they don't hear, because they don't hear as much as their hearing peers. So if you can't decode, you end up with a sort of a scramble of letters that turn into a scramble of potentially some sound, maybe some mouth movements, but you also don't have full knowledge of the spoken language in which you're trying to read. So then in that process, you don't have anything to really connect it to. And this means that your path to learning to read, sort of linking letters to sounds, knowing the language, and then knowing what you read, is really affected by not hearing those sounds fully. So when we look at the scribble at the last, at the bottom of this slide, these are actually Greek letters. And maybe some of you took Greek in school, I didn't. But imagine that you're trying to read this and you have no recollection or no knowledge of the Greek alphabet. You can probably, if we give you the key between the Greek letters and the letters that we're used to reading, you'll probably end up reading the following word. That's this one. Now, this is a word in Dutch, and it's pronounced gezellig. Gezellig. Great. Now you know that it is gezellig. If you're trying to pronounce this, it probably sounds completely different because you're approaching this with your decoding skills from English, most likely. But you still don't have linguistic comprehension of Dutch. So what this word means, what this scribble means, even if you're able to decode it to something that sounds or looks familiar to you, it's not familiar yet, because you don't have the linguistic comprehension of Dutch. It means, it's a very specific Dutch word. It means something like cozy, but it's also something that if you're with a group of friends and you're having fun, that could be gezellig. It's a get-together, it's homely, it's comforting. It's a very particular word. If you ever visit our country, I'll help you out there. So, what does this mean for the situation in which teachers are in trying to teach deaf and hard of hearing children to read in Uganda and Tanzania? And what does this imply for what they might need? And what does it imply for children? Teachers need to understand why they're running into problems. So they need to understand why why their deaf and hard of hearing learners struggle with learning to read as much. Because teachers are trained and teachers try their absolute best, and still they don't see results in their kids in the kids that they're trying to teach, which is hugely frustrating. So we have to help them overcome that by explaining why that is. And then we have to give them the skills by which they're able to actually teach their deaf and hard of hearing learners to read in a specific way, in an effective way. So once they have the theory and once they have the skills, they also need the materials. And we are looking for a sustainable way of offering teachers these 3 key points. So both the theory, the skills, and the materials. So that means that we're coming up with tools for teaching, or the reading method. And the reading method contains 3 key points. Tools for teaching, so what are you doing when you teach? Tools for language, because without language you can't learn how to read, so we need to build language skills first. And then tools for reading. So although we focus on reading, this is really the 3rd step that we're coming to. And this book contains the theory, the skills, and ways to make materials on these key 3 aspects. Now, in our training, we offer teachers the theory, so they can really make informed decisions on why they change their teaching from the existing curriculum to something that is more fitting to their learners. So they're able to make a decision on what to do for this deaf child who was born deaf, and make another decision for a hard of hearing child that maybe lost some hearing at age 4. Because they will need slightly different approaches and slightly different support and skills from the teacher, so that teachers can make these informed decisions. We offer them the skills. So our trainings, and I know this sense, I'm a bit biased, but they're a lot of fun because we work on these skills with them. We role play, we practice, we allow teachers and ourselves to make mistakes. We talk about them, and we really create an environment that allows teachers to gain those skills and leave our training with confidence. Deaf and hard of hearing children need different materials for learning, and they need more of them. For example, stories. We need loads of stories at different levels for children to learn to read effectively. That means that teachers need to be able to make those materials, because it's not sustainable for a teaching material production company to produce that many of them. So by giving teachers these skills, they can create the materials themselves, they can share them among their colleagues, and they can really gain that confidence to be able to do it themselves, and have the material that is relevant for them and for their learners. Then we work on consolidation. Our reading coaches are trained in video interaction guidance. And that is a coaching method in which the coaches video the teachers, and together they look at what goes well. And that consolidates the skills that we're trying to teach during our training. And in research from the Netherlands that is done at Keynote shows that this coaching is particularly important when doing a training such as these. That these types of coaching actually is one of the things that increases the efficacy of what you're trying to do. So here's some examples of our tools for teaching. These are pictures made at our training in Tanzania. And on the top corner, you see the little baskets that teachers have made. We learned, and this is a big learning point for us, because it's a pilot, and I'm a big fan of learning, and then taking that on board and changing what we were doing, and that's a gift of this project. We realized that the way in which people gave feedback was in a negative way, to show, I can tell you what you didn't do right, and that way you know what you need to do differently next time, and I've shown that I do know what you need to do. Sadly, that's not really how feedback works. Feedback is most effective when it's specific and aimed at learning, and when it's positive. If you give feedback and you give negative feedback, you need 4 positive points of feedback to level it out and let people leave with a sense of achievement and confidence. So in order to give feedback effectively, you're better off focusing on the positive, and you need to be very specific and have to rig your feedback for learning. So tell people what they've done right and how they can do that again, so that people will do that again in their daily life. So we came up with a strategy where we allowed everybody to give feedback to each other, to really practice these things. And this feedback was given out anonymously, and were put in these little baskets. Everybody folded their own basket to really practice with giving feedback. And it's such a fun exercise. We got the most beautiful feedback, and teachers could really experience what it's like if you get this positive feedback, and how it affects you mentally if you get positive feedback versus you're told you have to do this better next time. Now, secondly, if you see the red thread on the right of the slide, that is the learning pit from James Nottingham. And I've put the website below. And this learning pit is the idea that we all like to learn from and go from not knowing something to knowing something, from not having a skill to having a skill, and just go up like that. Doesn't happen like that. You need to fail, you need to try, you need to go back down, you need to realize that it's really difficult, and then you can sort of work your way out to mastery of a certain skill or a theory. And we really worked with teachers on this, and we use this tool and this view of learning to work with them and for them to be able to apply it to their classroom. So that's the tools for learning. So those can be applied to any classroom. It's not deaf specific at all, but it is just a general a view of learning that is important to build a positive atmosphere in your classroom. Now, the tools for teaching can actually be divided up in two bits. There's the tools for language, and there's the tools for reading. And you have to do one first before you can go to the other. And the first bit is really focused, the tools for language, in building those sign language skills with children. And then for reading, we add words and texts later on. So this is a combination of the book written by my colleague Kika, which was already based on Dutch methods, and methods that we use at Kentalis, or that we have used in the past, that really prove really effectively for teaching deaf and hard of hearing children. And these consist of several steps, and we work with teachers through these steps and really teach them the order in which to do things and the importance of doing things in a certain order. Now, some things are really hard for all of us, because I fail at these during trainings constantly, but, learning pit, so I fall back into my pit and I have to climb back out again. One of the key learnings that we have is that you teach first and you interact later. We see a lot of interaction that starts early, which on paper sounds great, but often looks like if you're trying to teach the word for apple or the sign for apple, and none of the kids know the apple or the sign for it, and you show them the apple and then they start asking, what is this? And we really want to get them to a point where they tell children, this is an apple, or an apple, however you sign it. This is an apple. I'm teaching you this, and then moving to interaction. So writing stories, it's a second point. Writing stories and creating meaningful context was another one. Teachers loved writing stories. And some of them struggled, and some were magnificent from the start, because a part of it is talent and interest. But really creating that meaningful context through stories and writing these stories together with a clear beginning, a beefy middle, and a clear ending really was a skill that teachers loved to learn. Now, fingerspelling, So the third point is linking words to sign language, pictures, and real objects. This is something that teachers picked up immediately. So as soon as we gave them a structure in which to do that, by sandwiching, for example, the word for apple with the sign for apple, and again, the word for apple, that really gave them structure and allowed something they already knew, namely that kids need these this visual information, and that children need sign language, and that real objects are great. And we combined it together into an effective teaching strategy. We saw a lot of fingerspelling, but one of the key points was really that fingerspelling is a way to remember the order of the letters. So in a word. So often people would start with fingerspelling and use it as a meaning-giving activity, while it's not. The function of fingerspelling is to give a better connection or a better understanding of the letters, and remembering, almost like muscle memory, which letters come first in a word. We got a lot of questions on pronunciation and lip reading. And what for us was really important is the diversity in the classroom, and to make sure that teachers didn't frustrate kids, but also realized that, again, that muscle memory and practicing to pronounce words can help children with remembering words later, and retrieving words from memory. And for those who are hard of hearing, specifically, it's a skill that is important for them, or it's one of the skills in their toolbox that they have in communicating with others. So really using, again, like fingerspelling, using those tools effectively. Now, the final point that was key for many teachers was the need for more stories and visual materials for deaf and hard of hearing learners. We need a multitude of stories. We need a multitude of visual materials. And by allowing teachers to build their catalog or build their library of visual materials and their library of stories during our training, and we're looking at also continuing that collaboration after our training between teachers to really allow them to have the materials that they need to teach and make it part of their lesson preparation. Now, I talked about this earlier, the video interaction guidance and the reading coaches. The reading coaches have been part of this plan from the beginning. Ideally, eventually, we as Centalis are no longer part of this project or part of a follow-up of a project or after that, however this goes. But the reading coaches and those trained in Uganda and Tanzania can carry this on and have the knowledge to train more people and to support more people in teaching reading for deaf and hard of hearing learners. And reading coaches are key. The reading coaches have more theoretical knowledge, can support teachers in the classroom and offer video interaction guidance. So these reading coaches received original training and did the teacher training with us. So they were co-trainers for our teacher training. The video interaction guidance was a lot of fun and gave them a really great framework to support teachers and allow teachers to feel confident in front of their classroom, and also shifted the way in which people felt about their own teaching. We had teachers who were afraid to come after the video was taped during their lesson to talk with the coach. And then as soon as the conversation started, they got a smile on their face and they realized it was a positive experience and they were being uplifted and empowered, and were just like, this is wonderful. And that really changed the dynamic. And that allows reading coaches to provide this additional support and effective support. We tried as much as possible to use existing infrastructure. In Uganda, we used the trainers and the tutors at primary teacher colleges, and in Tanzania, we used lecturers at Amukta University. And by using existing infrastructure, we're not trying to build something out of the blue, from the ground up. We give people already tasked with this responsibility of supporting teachers additional skills. And we hope that in the future, if we can continue this project, our reading coaches can become our master trainers. So what's our output? There will be a teacher's guide, which has a theoretical background and that will be used during training. We'll have a theory to practice guide for teachers to use in their everyday teaching and a materials resource book. So teachers will have a toolbox that they can use in their classroom day to day, and that they can learn from during training and refer back to if they want to refresh some of their knowledge. We have the possibility of our reading coaches becoming master trainers and offer CPD training, so continuous professional development training, where teachers don't have to come together for 2 weeks to be co-trained by us, but the reading coaches can do outreach to the schools and go for an afternoon session, which makes it a lot more sustainable. We have blueprints for rollouts in other countries. We know this works. We've seen the atmosphere in classrooms change. We've seen the confidence of teachers change. We've seen teachers teach with joy. And this is something that we know we can replicate in other countries. And finally, we have documentation on what went well, what didn't go so well, and hopefully on outcomes in the classroom. Now, COVID-19 is our new normal, at least for now. And it has, like with everything, like this conference, affected our work. And for us, it means that the project was supposed to finish in August 2020, but will most likely not finish for a while, because there are some activities that are school-based that we can't do at the moment because schools are closed to protect the health of kids and other citizens. It also means that we're now starting to think creatively on how can we do more distant learning? How can we use this time to orient teachers on some new aspects of the material? How can we support reading coaches so that once schools reopen, teachers are ready and reading coaches are there to support them? We've also seen something quite surprising, I suppose, or something at least that wasn't expected to happen. The teachers from our pilot schools in Uganda were asked to be involved in recording some lessons to be aired on TV and on YouTube in Uganda for deaf and hard of hearing children who are stuck at home, and give them access to learning from their own home. And during this recording, they applied some of the things that they learned during our training, because some of the lessons were literacy based. And afterwards they got feedbacks like, this is really good. What happened? What are these teachers doing? This is really positive. We want this for the other teachers as well. So we really see the impact, even if it's not a literacy lesson in our classroom, but we see the work being appreciated and continued when we're not necessarily there. And we're very, very grateful for that. Obviously, we hope that we can return to a new normal, an old normal, and continue this project to put the books in the hands of the teachers and have kids back in school learning. Specifically, deaf children are vulnerable and can't benefit from, for example, audio instruction via radio. So the sooner they can get safely back to school, the better. But for now, we'll have to leave it here and see where the future takes us. On to thank you. Bedankt. If you have any further questions, of course, there's a Q&A that I look forward to later. But after that, you can also send me an email chat on WhatsApp. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to meet in person at some point.
For such a clear and comprehensive presentation about the work that you're doing in Tanzania and Uganda. We do have a number of questions on the Padlet, and we'll start with those questions, but as Emmie said, if anybody's got an additional questions, please do add those now. So the first question that we have, Emmie, is, was the literacy focus led by the in-country professionals, their identification of need within their education system, or was it led by the research focus of the researchers involved?
Thank you, Alison. So this is a unique project in the sense that normally we get a request from a teacher training institute, and we work directly with them. And in this case, this was a request that came from the schools that we visited. So our work allows us to make school visits in these countries, and everywhere we go, we heard specifically for the school leavers. So for primary school leavers, like they fail their exams, they can't even read, we're really struggling, they don't understand what they're reading. And that meant, in order to solve that issue that was experienced on the ground by teachers, we had to sort of backtrack and go to primary, like the lower grades, and start there. And then not just working with the teachers and the schools, but actually working with government and other professionals. Because ultimately, this is not something that you can solve between us as Cantalis or anybody else and a single school. So that meant that we're now working with partners who didn't necessarily were the first identifiers of the issue, but we are working on a basis that this was a request from the country and from other partners within the country.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we have is, how are the in-country project leads supported to make other similar projects sustainable? And you kind of talked a little bit about that in your presentation. I just wonder if you could develop that a little further.
Yeah, sure. So we try as much as possible to work within existing infrastructures, because if we don't hand over the knowledge to people that they're then in a position to do something with it, to meet with teachers and continue training, then it's basically going to stop there at the end of the project. So we've done that by working with primary teacher colleges and with universities. At the moment, this is not yet a sustainable project. So this is a pilot in which we really want to show what is possible, develop the material, gather the impact and outcomes of it, learn lessons, because we've learned so much since the start of this project, and then make a strong case for a more sustainable rollout. Because then you're talking about a different type of budget, you talk about a different type of intervention, and this is going well. Conversations in both countries from the start have aimed for this sustainable rollout. So one of the things, for example, that we're doing in Uganda is transforming our 2-week teacher training into shorter chunks of training, that it becomes workshops that tutors and the reading coaches can do with teachers, because that is how their teacher training works, where they have time, they don't have the time to and the financial resources to bring everybody together in a hotel for 2 weeks. But within the project, that was the most cost-effective way to do that because it involved our travel, but it won't be sustainable on the long run. So we're really thinking about how can we shape this so that when we hand it over, this is something that they can continue. And we're very much committed also to making that next step with our partners. So to continue working, because I recognize that now if we leave, even if we give them the material, it will be fairly difficult to keep that sustainable to the level that it could be. So it's a two-tier process.
Thank you. We do have one or two more questions about the future sustainability, but one question that I think it's really important that we do ask, and again linked to what you were talking about during the presentation, is about support to parents. And this question asks specifically about supporting parents to extend learning within the home environment during a holiday. But I think it's more broadly to me also about how do you support parents to support the learning that's going on in school. Because I think we all recognise how vital it is that the teachers and the parents work hand in hand. So if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think especially now where we see in Uganda, schools are not open yet, if I'm not mistaken. Tanzania, schools are open, but I think across the world we're dealing with homeschooling at the moment with, teachers doing the best they can and supporting parents, but a lot more falling onto the parents. This project doesn't necessarily have a provision for that. A country like Uganda does have holiday packages. So kids at the end of a school year, parents can purchase a holiday package, which children can work through at home to revise that year's content during the holidays. I think for children in particular, parents are struggling with the fact that they often do not know the sign language that the children are using, the national sign language, and they don't necessarily have the skills. They might not be literate themselves. So then teaching literacy to your child is a whole different ballgame. So this is a struggle. We are working with specifically because we're also doing something on preschool education within this project. So specifically the language building. And we're thinking about how we can give teachers information, even if it's just a leaflet or a booklet, something small, something tangible that they can share with parents that are activities for language learning. Because parents do, like teachers, they try their absolute best and they see it's not working, and then they get frustrated, and then everybody blames them for the behavior that they show out of frustration, and that's not helping. So parents want to do better, just like teachers, but they're at their end. They've tried everything. So we really want to provide teachers with the tools to support parents. As Kentalis, we have different projects around parent awareness. Also, we've done that in Rwanda, we've done that in Uganda and in Zambia, that really focus on working with parents. But there is no provision within this project to support parents, as is suggested in this question, which I'd really like if there were. But unfortunately, that's not in the scope at the moment.
So that could perhaps be something that's built into the sustainability planning, and maybe that
absolute
leads us seamlessly to the next question about the next steps. Again, you've already in this session talked a little about future sustainability, about what's being funded for this pilot and how the learning from the pilot might be taken forward. But can you elaborate a little more about current plans to cascade that learning, perhaps to involve those parents as you've just talked? And again, maybe just because we have a question about the impact of COVID-19 as a separate question, I don't think you can talk about that separately, really, at the moment. Is it fair to ask you to kind of give a global answer to that, and just perhaps have a little longer to answer that question than you might otherwise have done?
I'll try. So the next step, I mean, our work currently is hugely affected by COVID. This project was supposed to finish in August, when I was recording the video that we all just watched. That was supposed to be the final month. And we have been graced with a fantastic donor who basically said, do whatever you need to do to keep everybody safe. We'll keep, you can have a no-cost extension. That's absolutely fine. Just keep everyone safe. Don't feel pressured to finish this. Focus on what you need to do at this moment, which was an absolute blessing. And that has meant that the project ends mid next year to the end of next year. But seeing as the pandemic is unfolding, we're looking at alternative ways of finishing this project. That does mean that we are looking at doing distance support, but also recording that distance support, which could then be part of future training and rollouts in other countries. And by combining that sustainability, rollout in other countries, follow up with our COVID response, we're able to make an investment that otherwise would have been disproportionate to the impact that we're trying to reach within just one project. So we're working under USAID Let's Read in Zambia, where we've already been able to include some of this work into learning to read for deaf children in a pilot that we're doing under USAID Let's Read in Zambia. So that's the first country, or the third country, that we're adding, which we're really excited about, and we would definitely be open to rolling this out in other countries as well. This was one of the reasons why having both Tanzania, and who teaches in Kiswahili, and Uganda, who teaches in English, was so important to us, because it showed that we can do this in different contexts. So in Uganda and Tanzania, we're committed to working towards a national rollout. This is not up to us. This eventually is a government decision. They have to pick it up. They need to show commitment in that this is what they want. We have to co-source funding for that. So there's a lot of question marks, steps to take. I'd love to be able to say we're doing this and we're starting tomorrow. I'd be so excited. Unfortunately, that's not how this world works. But we are seeing some positive sort of byproducts of our COVID response being able to carry over into maybe a more sustainable rollout, and also sharing this knowledge more widely beyond this project.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left. It's not fair to give you another long question to answer at this point. So can I just say thank you very much indeed for your presentation and for those clear responses, and for what you're doing in Tanzania and Uganda too. And we look forward to hearing more about that in the future. So the next element of the programme is the presentation from Mary Hare, who is our platinum sponsor for today. So thanks again, Emmie, and thank you to Mary Hare.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. We're delighted to be sponsoring the event again at Mary Hare. I've got a short time with you, but I just thought I'd bring you up to date on our primary school project with our fantastic foundation. The fundraising is going really well. Our current site, Mill Hall at Greenham, is on the market, and we are hoping to begin next spring the new primary school on our campus, in time to open in September 2022. Sadly, I think for a range of complex reasons, there are deaf children out there who are going to need specialism earlier and indeed already do, whether that's around barriers to their language development or whether, sadly, even more sadly, it's around their self-esteem and mental health and well-being and the need for peers. So we believe this primary school can play a really important function in the range of provision you offer to families with deaf children. And I will repeat something some of you have heard me say several times before, that my dream is that we do this collaboratively and in a spirit of working together, because for us, the small number of deaf children who need such a provision, time is of the essence. It's going to be a great school, not ostentatious, not award-winning, but it's going to be a modern, built-for-purpose school that we could be proud of for the next century. And I wondered, many of you may instinctively think that any specialist school for a primary age child would be really a matter of last resort. And I think it's really important, therefore, that I leave you with the words of a family of one of our pupils who's now at the secondary, but who started at the primary, because I think the messages that come through from the parents are very powerful. So I commend that to you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. It's good to catch up, albeit electronically, and I hope we'll all be together in a room again soon. Thank you.
One of the things that Jen's mentioned a lot is when you see them playing together, they're like peers, proper peers, so they really play together nicely. And it was one of the things that was hard before, was that he wouldn't understand what the rules of the game were, couldn't keep up with changing games and things, and so got left out quite a lot. When as soon as he got here, suddenly they're all on an equal playing field, and it was just so nice to see. And his happiness and his confidence at home increased almost immediately. So after a couple of weeks here, he was a changed boy.
He's so happy on the weekends, and yeah, it's just made our whole lives just so much happier. He really struggled with mainstream school, far more than we ever thought. We came not expecting Thomas to ever board. We were planning to never send our child away to boarding, and then within minutes of walking through the door, I was totally overwhelmed with the inclusion of every child. And when I brought Jeff and Thomas back, when Thomas went straight into the class with a massive beaming smile on his face, and he wouldn't leave, he ran up the stairs and he didn't want to leave again. And that was enough for us to know that he would in the right place. Yeah. We'd love Thomas to go to Hare Secondary, and that's our aim. When we came to his parent consultation, we were just amazed by the quality and the quantity of the work that he was coming out with, and so we'd love that to continue. We've gone from feeling like, what's he going to do with life, to he can do anything. And when he says, I want to work in Daddy's work, we can now say, yeah, you can do whatever you want, and Hare Primary's given him that future.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the future of the cyborg generations, helping to see our users live in harmony with their technology. Hundreds of thousands of people have bionic sensory implants interfacing with their brains. They have become cyborgs, a state of living in which technology has become embedded or melded within the biological human form. Any cochlear implant user is, by definition, a cyborg. After more than 30 years of experience with cochlear implantation in this country, neuroscientists have had a significant amount of time to study the impact of the partnership between this technology and the brain. The evidence is irrefutable. The cochlear implant is a very successful neuroprosthesis. However, despite the phenomenal progress made by CI users in sound recognition and in speech and language development, there is one undeniable fact. Even the most innovative use of the CI electrode array or the most advanced processing strategies cannot replicate normal hearing. As a result, there are gaps in the sound information being supplied to the brain. The brain, therefore, has to compensate for this missing information. It is accepted that, over a period of time and with sufficient training and support, compensatory strategies can be developed, which enable the CI users to fill in the gaps and make sense of what they are hearing. You all have probably witnessed this process. I'm sure many of you have played both vital and pivotal roles in enabling deaf children with CIs to learn how to make excellent use of the incomplete auditory information they are receiving. Once the child's spoken language becomes fluent and speech understanding is at an age-appropriate level, it seems reasonable to assume that successful compensatory strategies have been developed. However, the recent neuroscience research evidence suggests that this apparent success does not mean that the CI user is now operating on a completely equal basis compared to their hearing peers. Research evidence, including my own, is now suggesting that CI technology works by putting a higher than normal demand on cognitive resources. This, in turn, reduces the available cognitive capacity to deal with other cognitive activities. The issue of available cognitive resources is central to understanding the needs of the CI user. Cognitive resources are extremely precious. They are needed for memory, learning, and understanding. All cognitive neuroscientists agree that there is a limit to the number of cognitive resources available to carry out these vital activities. So cognitive capacity is finite. It is not possible to add extra resources in order to meet additional demand. In neuroscience research, the use of cognitive resources and their effect on the available cognitive capacity can be tested in many ways. One of the most popular methods is to require your research participant to multitask. So they are forced to divide their available cognitive resources between their set tasks. My own research used a dual task paradigm. The theory behind this approach is that if an individual is required to perform two tasks simultaneously, the available cognitive resources have to be shared. One task is selected as the most important, i.e. the primary task. Thus, as the difficulty of this task increases, more cognitive resources will be allocated to it, at the cost of the secondary task. If the primary task becomes a speech understanding test, performance on the secondary task will become an indicator of the listening effort involved. This is because listening effort is the number of cognitive resources needed for speech understanding. So, if the listening conditions become harder for the primary task and listening effort increases, more cognitive resources will be needed for speech understanding, meaning the remaining cognitive capacity to process other demands is reduced. This will then mean that the performance in the secondary task will suffer and become worse than before. This reduction in secondary task performance will indicate the increase in cognitive resources needed to understand speech. So, any decreases in secondary task performance equals increases in listening effort required by the primary task. In my research, the primary task became a speech intelligibility test using basic English lexicon sentences. Each of these sentences has 4 key words. For example, the man ate fried chicken. The secondary task became a digit stream, presented visually, with the numbers 1 to 9 appearing rapidly in a random order. In each trial, the participant was required to count the number of times the target 8 appeared in this stream. Accuracy in target detection was compared between easy and hard listening conditions. So, decreases in target detection, i.e. visual accuracy, equals increases in listening effort. My participant groups using this combination of tasks were 30 normal hearing participants listening to normal speech, 30 normal hearing participants listening to CI simulations, and 25 CI users listening through their processors. The initial hypotheses were there will be little listening effort when performing the dual task in quiet. When noise was introduced, then listening effort would increase. This seemed to be the case for the normal hearing participants listening to normal speech. No significant changes in listening effort were found at the group level in quiet. But in noise, significant increases in listening effort were found. Not only this, there was a further significant increase in listening effort levels when the SNR worsened by 4 dB. However, in the CI users, their listening effort scores were significantly increased in quiet. These positive listening effort scores in quiet were not unique to just the CI users. They were also found in normal hearing participants who were listening to CI simulations. So, my hearing participants only increased their listening effort when conditions became noisy. The relationship was very clear. The noisier the conditions became, the more listening effort was exerted. But something very different happened with the CI users themselves. They started to experience increased listening effort, even in the easiest listening conditions. They all had significantly increased listening effort levels when listening in quiet. So even in the best possible listening conditions, they were having to exert more listening effort than someone who had normal hearing. When I trained hearing people to understand CI simulations and then tested them in these conditions, the hearing people started behaving exactly like all my CI users. These CI simulations mimic as closely as possible the information given from the electrodes in the implant. So it seems it is the degraded auditory input being provided by the CI that is creating these increases of listening effort, even in the easiest listening conditions. It is important to note that, in my research, I recruited as widely as possible. So my CI participants were bilaterally implanted. Others were unilateral CI users. Some were implanted early in childhood. Others received the CI as adults. Some had the very newest technology. Others had earlier devices. And their experience with the implant ranged from 2 to as much as 25 years. But this variation did not seem to matter. The results for all my CI participants were the same. Everybody demonstrated high levels of listening effort, even in the best possible listening conditions, i.e. quiet, with no background noise at all. So this suggests that the high demand on cognitive resources begins from the moment the CI is switched on. This effort does not decrease as the CI user gets more experience of listening through their CI. These findings are in agreement with other researchers in this field. Indeed, in a recent neuroscience conference that I attended, the leading international expert in listening effort, Professor Kathleen Pickler-Fuller, said that CI users have to be mental athletes at Olympian level because of all the extra activity their brain has to undertake in order to understand before they are ready to start learning from the information they have processed. So, current neuroscience suggests that although a CI child may progressively develop better compensatory strategies and get better at understanding speech, the fact they need to compensate in the first place means that the listening will always be more effortful for them than the hearing child. So the evidence suggests there will always be an additional load on the brain that is not normally there. In the same way, although having 2 implants does help to improve speech perception in situations such as in noise, as well as help with sound localization, the input from the 2 implants is still unnatural. Therefore, the need to compensate and the extra load on the cognitive capacity of the brain is still there. So there is a cost to being a cyborg. In order to use the technology, so the precious cognitive resources have to be diverted to the task of filling in the gaps in the auditory information received. Over the past 30 years, generations of CI users have been created, who are now living in partnership with CI technology. There is the expectation that this existence as a cyborg will continue for decades. The neuroscience research evidence suggests that the CI user, harmonious coexistence with their implant is dependent upon finding ways to cope with the fact that some cognitive resources have to be continually and perpetually diverted to feed the demands of the CI technology. So it's essential to recognise that for CI users, the cognitive capacity tank is not full. Where exactly the needle is on the dial cannot yet be precisely determined, but the principle is established that some cognitive resources are not available because they are needed to feed the demands of the CI. So for CI users, as cognitive load increases, a lack of cognitive capacity to deal with these demands, i.e. cognitive overload, is going to occur earlier than with a child or adult with normal hearing. At this point, cyborg technology comes into conflict with caveman physiology. This is because stress will start to be triggered at the point that cognitive overload is experienced. The reason for this is that the brain perceives this overload as a threat. As a result, it will respond in a very primitive way. In fact, the response will be identical to the one that was triggered in our caveman days by the presence of a saber-toothed tiger at the mouth of the cave. Initially, a fight or flight response will occur, which in our earliest days would have helped survival. But as the threat continues, a more chronic stress response is triggered. The HPA axis is disrupted. This is the connection between the hypothalamus in the brain, the pituitary gland, also in the brain, and the adrenal glands above the kidneys. These are pivotal glands which control most of our bodily functions. This includes the movement of food through the gut, the operation of the immune system, and the circulation of blood around the body. The HPA axis even controls our fertility. A whole series of health problems can begin if the HPA axis is disrupted by chronic stress. These include allergies, increased susceptibility to infections, irritable bowel syndrome, decreased gut motility, bloating, fluid retention, problems with circulation in fingers and toes, joint pain, chronic fatigue syndrome, and infertility, including period stopping in girls. Mental health problems can also be triggered by chronic stress. These include emotional reactivity, for example mood swings, unhealthy reward-seeking behaviour, for example comfort eating, obsessiveness and repetitive behaviour, for example obsession with cleanliness and repeatedly washing hands, anxiety and depression. It is important to recognise this complete physical and mental overreaction caused by the chronic stress response has occurred because our physiological mechanisms are evolving far more slowly than our technological abilities. Our physiology was perfect for a caveman existence. It is, however, unsuited to the cognitive demands required by the modern world. Our brains are capable of incredible creativity and adaptability, resulting in the phenomenal technological progress of recent decades. The physiological mechanisms which dictate the health of all of our organs, however, have not adapted at the same speed. Our primitive systems related to the fight or flight and the ongoing HPA involvement are intended for protection against physical threat to life. However, they can be triggered by any perceived threat. Cognitive overload, i.e. inability to process cognitive information because there are no resources left, is seen as one of these threats to physical safety and is responded to accordingly. Also, even more worryingly, the protective nature of these stress mechanisms is such that they can easily become sensitized. In other words, the stress response can become triggered progressively more and more easily if the event of cognitive overload is perpetuated over a period of months and years. This means that these health problems can compound and become exacerbated as the CI child becomes older if they have not been protected from experiencing cognitive overload. Therefore, symptoms of HPA axis disruption may become more obvious and more difficult to address if lifestyle changes and good habits in managing cognitive resources are not established early and perpetuated into adulthood. So, in order for cyborg CI technology to live in harmony with these caveman mechanisms, an intervention is needed. Any winning formula of intervention needs to take into consideration the fact that cognitive resources are more limited for CI user because of their need to compensate, and the fact that cognitive overload needs to be avoided in order to promote optimum health and well-being. I believe that one approach that could achieve this is my Go for Gold strategy. This Go for Gold strategy is based on the idea that, like any athlete, the CI user can reach their full potential with the right combination of rest, training and support. These three essentials can be achieved by three key interventions. Golden silences, providing the rest. Golden opportunities, providing the training. And gold star support, providing the support by enabling the essential reduction in cognitive load. This so the CI child has the capacity to learn at the same pace as a hearing child. Silence is golden, as the saying goes. However, in my experience, talking to many professionals working with CI users, the whole concept of therapeutic silence is rather alien and potentially problematic, so I'm very aware that some clarification is needed at this point. Silence in this Go for Gold strategy does not necessarily mean the requirement for the CI user to switch off their device. This is important because I am very aware that some CI users experience tinnitus if their implant is switched off. Some CI users prefer to remain permanently switched on, and, especially in the case of young children learning to use their device, it is not always a great idea to introduce the practice of physically switching off their CI during the day. However, to introduce a healthy pattern of stress, it is necessary to intermittently reduce cognitive load. It is being increasingly recognised that mindfulness activities are particularly good at reducing this load and lowering stress levels. Mindfulness activities include mindful colouring, painting, knitting, crochet, sewing, carpentry and cooking. Or play activities such as Duplo, Lego, construction toys, jigsaws and imagination games with model figures. However, it is essential that this play activity does not involve any electronic screen time. These screen time activities require considerable cognitive resources and are not restful to the brain. The same applies to listening to music, even soothing music. It may seem to be restful emotionally, but it requires too many cognitive resources to process, so it should be avoided during golden silences. So the essential requirements of these periods of golden silence are that they should occur in a quiet environment with no background noise, no music, and very importantly, no compensation. This ensures there is no need for compensatory strategies to interpret the sound, which further reduces demand on cognitive resources. There is, unfortunately, as yet, no magic formula which will enable professionals to calculate the number of periods of golden silence needed to create a healthy pattern of stress for CI users. So it's not possible yet to set any rules. However, encouraging a lifestyle that incorporates mindful practices such as meditation, Tai Chi, yoga or Pilates, together with the encouragement to get outdoors on a daily basis and walk in calming spaces, will all contribute to creating a healthier pattern of stress. All these activities help to reduce cognitive load, decreasing the likelihood that the HPA axis will be disrupted. To counterbalance the golden silences and encourage the continued development of compensatory strategies, it's important to find golden opportunities to interact and communicate with the CI child. Golden opportunities are times when the child is alert, happy and receptive. These golden periods can be optimised by high quality interaction, promoting speech understanding of a wide range of vocabulary. It's best to aim for quality rather than quantity, bearing in mind that all of these activities will increase listening effort, and this will become stressful after a time. Also, once cognitive capacity has hit the limit, the child will not be able to benefit from your interaction. Signs that the child is reaching their limit in terms of cognitive capacity can be irritability, tiredness, difficulty in taking in new information, poor memory for something that's just been said, lack of cooperation, unwillingness to join in with an activity, not wanting to go out, withdrawal, taking themselves off on their own, not wanting to be bothered or disturbed, outbursts of temper, to shouting or screaming, and aggressiveness. If this happens, it becomes very possible the reason is that listening efforts become too high and they have reached the peak of their cognitive capacity and badly need time out. In the classroom, other behaviours may occur when listening effort becomes too high. For example, being disrupted in class, not paying attention, opting out of activities, making silly noises, inability to stay still, difficulty in remaining focused on a task, difficulty understanding a task, and underachieving compared to the teacher's expectations. However, it is almost impossible to judge how many of these behaviours are directly related to cognitive overload. Also, in my experience, the effect of this overload is cumulative, so overload tends to creep up on you over a sustained period of listening as progressive tiredness, and only becomes evident when a state of exhaustion is reached. This means it's very difficult to identify the exact moment at which cognitive overload has occurred. Instead, it only indicates the damage of this cognitive load may be a gradual deterioration in physical and mental health that becomes progressively more and more obvious as the symptoms accumulate over a period of years. This is why a clinical test to monitor the cognitive resources required by CI users is so essential, so that the relationship between cognitive load and health can be closely monitored in all CI users. In the meantime, CI users need to be empowered to manage the consequences of their listening effort by understanding the need to reduce their stress levels. Getting the right support at the right time is also a key part of this process. Essentially, support of any kind should help to free up cognitive capacity. The more effective the support is, the more chance the CI child has of achieving their true potential. So this is why support should not be gold, it should be gold star. Gold star support needs to include ease of access to the spoken word and easier access to the underlying concepts of what is being learnt. The overall aim is to provide more clues to help the child fill in the gaps in the CI input more quickly and more easily, reducing the demands for cognitive resources. This will then leave more cognitive capacity for learning language and other concepts. However, the current clinical audiological assessments may mean that a CI child is judged to be performing so well in both speech understanding and language development, they are placed in classroom situations without sufficient support. Under these circumstances, they are much more likely to experience excessive listening effort and cognitive overload. This increased risk of cognitive overload may cause chronic stress reactions because the body will react primitively to this perceived threat. So CI users need to be empowered to take control of their own mental and physical health by introducing golden silences into their everyday lives. They need to choose the activities that suit them best at each stage in their lives. After all, cochlear implantation is a lifelong partnership, so their mindful practices need to be lifelong too. CI users also need to understand the value of taking golden opportunities to improve their skill in employing compensatory strategies, because these are the key to their success. However, they need to appreciate that these compensatory strategies impose a cognitive load that appears to be constant, irrespective of their experience in listening with their implant. So this means that all CI users should be empowered to gain the individual level of gold star support they need to achieve the best possible access in order to minimise demand on their cognitive resources and increase their residual cognitive capacity and maximise their potential in terms of learning and achieving their personal aims. Go for Gold is about enabling CI users to adapt to their limitations in available cognitive resources, whilst also making lifestyle changes that optimise their residual capacity by reducing the cognitive load. It is potentially one strategy to help CI users live in harmony with their technology. However, I believe that success in the future of our cyborg generations is dependent upon understanding that cognitive resources are limited and precious. Recognising that electronic screen time activities may pose a health risk because of the demand on cognitive resources. Finding other ways to maximise residual cognitive capacity in order to optimise what can be achieved. Continuing to research how cognitive resources are allocated in CI users so that a clinical measurement tool can be developed to aid monitoring of the risks of cognitive overload, and especially exploring therapies or interventions to mend the mismatch between caveman physiology and cyborg technology. I have spent the past academic year training to become a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. I believe that many of the therapeutic techniques I have learnt, particularly those designed to allay anxiety disorders, can be used both as treatment and prophylaxis to reduce the likelihood of HPA axis dysfunction occurring as a result of excessive cognitive overload. As a result, I'm currently planning to develop a consultancy business, providing advice, education and treatment to assist in stress management and to promote optimum physical and mental health for individuals, both deaf and hearing, experiencing chronic stress. Ultimately, I firmly believe that cyborgs, such as CI users, can find ways to live in harmony with their technology. However, the key is taking nothing for granted and in continuing to explore the complexities of this incredible partnership so that lifelong coexistence, both now and in the future, can be both healthy and happy. Thank you for your listening effort today.
Helen, thank you so much for that really interesting and inspiring talk. People are going to have to contain themselves hearing the Q&A session because there will be a short break. But before that, please do all stay where you are because we are going to hear from Rachel O'Neill about the READY study. Thank you, Rachel.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you, Rachel.
Oh, good. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about a research project which is based at the University of Manchester and the University of Edinburgh. It's called READY, and it's about young people moving from the age of 15 to 24. Next slide, please. So the investigation is led by Professor Alice Young. She's the lead investigator. And then there's 4 other investigators who are based at either University of Edinburgh or Manchester. Helen Chilton, who you'll know, myself at Edinburgh, Katie Rogers at Manchester, and Gary at Manchester. And we also have 6 young deaf people who are also we're training for, so that they will lead the interviewing part of the project. So these are the 6 young people who are involved. Okay, next slide, please. So this study is a 5-year study and we're 1 year in now. It covers England, Wales and Scotland, not Northern Ireland, unfortunately. What we're trying to do is build a representative sample of deaf young people with any degree of deafness, including mildly deaf, unilaterally deaf. We're trying to find people aged 15 to 19 now. But they can start actually filling in a questionnaire online when they're 16. So we're presently have 100. We're looking for 200 more by next June. Now that is a very tall order. This is why I'm talking to you today, to try to see whether you can help to recruit more young people in this age group. The idea is we have an annual online survey, and they'll be asked to do this again every year for 4 more years, and they will receive a voucher, a £10 Amazon voucher every time they do that. We have ethical approval from the University of Manchester and Edinburgh. Next slide, please. So the research question we're trying to find out about, first of all, is what are the risk factors and what are the protective factors for young people in relation to their achievement. And we're looking at autonomy, social development, well-being, and educational and occupational outcomes. So we're looking at things which protect the child or the young person as they grow up, move from school to college to university and work, and protective factors which, with a large representative sample, we should find. Thank you. Next slide, please. The second part of the research question is thinking about how these factors, which we're started to identify, how they interact. So how does personal family background and how people's lives are now interact with their sense of well-being, their social development, their job? You can just put the slide on again there. Just the second part will come down. So we're going to look at the very great variety of deaf young people. And of course, as we know, there's a very wide range of factors which are likely to affect outcomes for deaf young people. So because we're going to hopefully get 300 or even more deaf young people, we can start to do this. We can start to think, okay, having, for example, a positive or supportive family background makes a lot of difference. Next slide, please. So our aim, really, the crystal ball we're trying to look into, is to find out if we can predict what is needed to maximise these outcomes for any deaf young person. So we're wanting to look at autonomy, well-being and employment to see what factors could affect their positive. We're not just talking about great exam results. We're talking about confidence. We're talking about experiencing work, for example, at school. Work placements might lead to much better outcomes at work. We're looking at a person with friends who can socially move in and out of groups. We're really looking at the whole person. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we have already gathered data on 92 young people. We've actually got 100 in the study up till the lockdown period started. And this is looking at the ones before lockdown started. We paused the study at lockdown because it wasn't fair at that moment to carry on doing recruitment. But we have started again now. So this first group of wave, we're calling wave 1A, most of them were deaf from before 5. 10% had one or more deaf parents. A third of young people in this study had additional needs, which we sort of expect. Most of them were female, and we are looking for more male participants. And they were quite well qualified, this first keen group. 6 were already in work, and 3/4 had good qualifications. So people who first of all volunteer for this sort of study are not necessarily typical, and now we're trying to even things up in this next year. We're trying to find more young men. We're trying to find people from areas of the UK which we so far haven't got many people from, like the east of England, more in Scotland, more in Wales, particularly mid Wales, more in the southwest. You can see from the map where we have participants at the moment. The bottom graph chart here shows you socio-economic status, and the people on the right are overrepresented. They're from people who are from wealthier or better off backgrounds. This is, again, not a total surprise to us because I've done similar sorts of research before. People who volunteer first tend to have more resources. So we're also looking for more young people from low-income families. Okay, next slide, please. So this is where you can click through to the website to find out more about the study, and the email the project ready@Manchester. Young people themselves can look at the website and then check if they're eligible, or they can just click through from the website. This is the link. And you'll also be able to read the results from the first year of the study, which are quite extensive, and they are on the NDCS research page. I should have said earlier on, the study is funded by National Deaf Children's Society, which we're very grateful for. If you have any questions at all about the READY study, please contact me. We don't want referrals of students. We just want young people to decide for themselves to take part. And the best way they can do that is if you tell them about it, show them the website, and then we're hoping that we're going to get hundreds more young people to take part in the study. The more we have, the more sure we can be about our findings. So I'm very grateful for your help. I know that many of you have already tried this once last year, or perhaps twice. Please keep going, especially with the younger students who are just 15 now, 16 before the end of June. That we want anyone between 15 and 19 to sign up for the study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to have a 5-minute break now. Just while we're doing that, I just want to very briefly tell you that in March 2021, we will be having the BATOD conference. The committee have decided to do this conference online. Obviously, with coronavirus, health and safety, things are just too uncertain, so we feel it would be easier to do it online. Hopefully, soon we will be able to announce the actual date of when that's going to happen in March. So please keep an eye out for the email to inform you of the date of that conference in March. And I want to say a big thank you to Frank Barnes School for their continued support. Hopefully, in very soon we will be able to have an actual conference with the school. So thank you very much. Okay, welcome back. That was a really interesting presentation. Thank you so much for that. I've had lots of feedback and comments already. So well done. From one implant person to another, I know that cognitive load, I know that feeling well. So there are some questions that we're going to put to you now. give us some examples of how listening effort could be measured?
Okay, so as you saw, there was one example, and basically there's 3 different ways of doing cognitive load measurements. One is behavioural, which is the approach that I took with the dual task. The other approach is to do it qualitatively, so via subjective ratings. And one advantage of that is you can really get a nice feel, an intuitive feel of what it's actually like to experience a cognitive load. But the downside of that is that it's not really, you can't get any numbers, like proper scientific numbers from it, like empirical evidence. It's very individual to the person and can vary hugely. And everyone could have potentially different thresholds of how much listening effort is too much. So it's quite difficult to get a real comparative measure, which is subjective ratings. The other way of measuring is using physiological tools. So that, for example, there's you can do pupil dilation. And I did a little bit of that in my work to try and validate what I was finding behaviourally. And there's also, you can do brain waves. They're now using near-infrared spectroscopy, which is another brand new sort of imaging tool that you can look for the brain. All sorts of things. Again, with that, it's difficult to know whether or not what you're observing in these various physiological measures are actually what you're looking for. You know, it could be something else. It could be a byproduct. Is it actually listening effort that you're looking at? It's very difficult to tell. So I went for the behavioural approach because I was trying to find something that could potentially be used in the clinic and be used easily and even at the same time as the normal speech understanding tests. But as I say, there are downsides to everything. But those are the different ways to do it. 3 main ways: physiological, behavioural, and subjective.
Thank you. I know that listening effort can be quite problematic to measure. So yeah, for that. Another question. Did within your research, did you use people who have cochlear implants, but also who use sign language, or people who are bilingual or who do use sign language as part of their, did you use that as part of your Gold Star community? Anybody within that as part of your Gold Star support?
Yes. So within my own personal research, I included all types of communicators as well as cochlear implant users. So I did have those that were mainly BSL and were born deaf as well, and were part of the deaf community. And there was also those that used it alongside being oral. And then also some that never really used sign language in their life because perhaps, for example, they became deaf later on. So they've been hearing up to then. So a whole variety. And what was really interesting was no matter what, the cognitive load caused by the cochlear implant was always there. But there is some research to suggest that sign language can help with reducing cognitive load and can indeed be part of the Gold Star support. But there is variation in terms of how the sign language is being processed by the brain. So really you should perhaps rename listening effort to processing effort, because sign language, even though it's a brilliant visual or inclusive tool, it still requires processing by the brain. And I've had reports from a couple of people, a couple of students, especially in a university environment, where they said that they found it exhausting trying to listen and also watch the interpreter at the same time. So it was almost like sensory overload and they felt a bit overwhelmed. So they had to choose one or the other. But to say it's very varied, and I think it's like so many factors involved in terms of whether they're brought up with sign language or whether they're later on, and same with the cochlear implant when they got it, and also their deafness. So many factors. But so it's basically just trying to find the best support for the individual person. If BSL helps them and they feel the help and they feel the reduction in cognitive load, go for it. Or if they need other mechanisms or whatever they need, or if they need more than one, go for it. Whatever helps. And generally speaking, I find that learners generally know intuitively, even if they can't show you quantitatively, they know inside themselves, actually, that helped, or that was too much, or that's not enough. But to say this, it's really frustrating. There can't be this kind of blanket policy in a way. But yeah, so that's a very roundabout answer to that question. I hope there was something useful in there.
No, that was very useful. And I know that for many people with cochlear implants, you do have to pick often one or the other method, but it's definitely good to have the option, to give you those different options.
Absolutely.
Rather than relying only. So I think that's, the key to it. Absolutely. So a lovely answer. Thank you. Another question. What feedback have you had so far about the going for gold materials, and have you had that feedback from professionals or learners? What kind of thing have they said about the resource?
So it's been principally from teaching professionals, but a few adult sort of cochlear implant users as well. So what the professional community, from what I've heard so far, have said is that they were really relieved to have that connection between the science to actually support what they're doing. So most of these are teachers of the deaf working within mainstream schools. So they're having to constantly justify their presence. And they said that finally they were able to connect the science and actually have a justification for their work. So really, really appreciative of it, which is wonderful for me to hear personally. And also other ones that said that actually there's finally, it makes sense and they understand more what the deaf students are going through. So they feel more able to support them. Oh, that reminds me, I also got some feedback from parents of cochlear implant users, both child and adult, and they were saying, that makes a lot of sense. And it was really encouraging, and they found it a relief to know that there might be options for them to have a look at in terms of how to best support their child or adult son or daughter. So that was really positive on that front too, which is again wonderful to hear. And then the adult cochlear implant users themselves. So I spread it amongst, cochlear implant support groups and other communities I had access to, and just wanted to get some feedback and see what they thought about it. And most of them said that they actually took it with them to work, and also to some of their relatives, to try and explain why they do what they do. Like, for example, one person said, I found it so hard to work full time. So, and I was still thinking, and she was still thinking to herself, am I doing something wrong? Am I not using my cochlear implant correctly? And when she saw the campaign, she went, okay, I've got an explanation. So it was a light bulb moment for her. And she was able to take it to her colleagues and say, see, this is why. So it's not me being, rude or lazy or just selfish. It's actually, there's a reason for this. And she said that she found that such a burden off her shoulders. So on the whole, I've been getting extremely positive feedback, which is again really encouraging to hear. And I do know that some people are now trying to think about how to convert the language used within the leaflet so they can be accessed by those that have lower language capabilities. So they're trying to broaden it out. And there was talk of doing this potentially in America. I'm not sure the latest on what's happening there, because of course other circumstances have kind of arisen and other priorities had to take over. But again, thinking about how to make this even more widely spread. So overall, really, really good stuff. And I'm, as I say, really nice to hear that on a personal level.
Thank you. That's really good feedback, isn't it? And I know that lots of teachers of the deaf, as well as teachers of the deaf, have cochlear implants themselves as well. Anybody working with children, this information really helps the planning as well for children's learning. I think we have another question. Did your research include or consider hearing aid users as well as cochlear implant users? Just because one of the teacher who asked this, I think, was thinking about the effects of hearing aid users being similar to cochlear implants, perhaps?
So my particular research focused principally just on cochlear implant users. So my Go for Gold was kind of based directly on that, and that's the only reason why I focus on CI users. But I do know from the wider literature that there is evidence of very similar effects in hearing aid users as well, because basically it's just almost the same kind of situation in terms of there's missing auditory information the person has to compensate for. And they have similar challenges, of course, in terms of tuning and the appropriate set of their hearing aids as cochlear implants do. So I, from a personal level, would say yes, they're very similar, and all the Go for Gold kind of strategies could potentially help them. I just can't empirically back that up for you directly because my research didn't focus on that particular group. So that's the status there. But I think you're right. And indeed, most of the research literature that I've seen, and also all the researchers I've spoken to over at various conferences, they say, yeah, it's very, very similar. But there's more or less than, it's difficult to say. But the fact there's a cognitive load there at all means the person is that much closer to being pushed over to ill health and even compromised mental health. So same risks, same support needed.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you. I think one of the things that one of the things that I've noticed with cochlear implant users is that children and teenagers, there's a sort of sound bomb in the morning when they put their cochlear implant on. I don't know if you feel the same. In the morning you first put it on, you get this kind of almost explosion, and the Going for Gold strategy has been really useful in managing that. Another question. Is there any evidence as to whether radio aids can reduce the cognitive load?
Again, so my specific work, of course, didn't look at that, but yes, there is evidence. Again, as with any research, there's huge variations in outcomes and you have to consider individual differences. But overall, the general findings tend to be that yes, radio aids does help to reduce cognitive load, but it does depend on the situation and also whether or not the hearing aids is kind of being programmed right and the radio is the right amplification, etc., etc. There's also all sorts of compounding factors here, as always part of the nature of research. But yes, and it kind of comes in with my kind of principle of any kind of support to reduce cognitive load will surely be welcomed. So there is some research evidence and it's growing all the time. I'm glad to say the research field of listening effort is growing all the time. And the researchers are really beginning to listen and really beginning to think about the load imposed by deafness and also by hearing aids and also by assistive technologies. For example, the cochlear implant manufacturers are now starting to bring in specific computer algorithms to try and measure listening effort in lifetime. But again, that's brand new stuff, and it's trying to make it work and trying to get it off the ground is remarkably difficult. And I know, for example, my listening effort test that I developed has its own methodological limitations, so it needs much more development, even being converted to a computer app so it can actually be applied in everyday life. It's trying to get to the next level, but people, they are listening. The message is getting out there that it's important to think about assistive technologies and thinking about listening effort.
Thank you so much. I think we've got just maybe 3 minutes left about that. So maybe just a quick question. The cochlear implant simulation, can we access that? Because it would be really useful to be able to show classroom teachers and other adults, other professionals.
Unfortunately, I would love for the resources to be directly available. Unfortunately, the way that the test was built, because I had to build in to make sure that stimuli presented was randomized and counterbalanced and all those other things, like methodological things to control. The simulation was produced as part of the program. So the sentence gets put in in their unfiltered normal form and then gets changed into a simulated form. And I've got no direct recordings of that, unfortunately. But there are software that you can use. I think it's called the PRAAT, so PRAAT, that can convert whatever you want into a cochlear implant simulated sound. I'm not sure the latest status on that, whether you have to pay for it or whether it's for free, but you can use that kind of software to manipulate whatever recordings or sound tools you want into the cochlear implant version. So unfortunately, my Stimony, it was designed as part of MATLAB, and it's not, it's a little cumbersome to use. So we had to go down this route, which is a little frustrating, because I agree, it would be a brilliant teaching tool.
Well, thank you so much, Helen. I know that some of the questions are quite in depth, and we didn't have a huge amount of time. But it's really great to know that these experiences count for so much, and it's very useful to have live examples to help illustrate for teachers of the deaf to really understand what's going on for everybody. So I very much appreciate your presentation and your responses to the questions. I know that there are some other questions in the Padlet, but if you're happy to go into that afterwards and maybe to respond to some of those, that would be wonderful. That's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you for inviting me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So that brings us almost to the end of our afternoon now. Thank you so much for your attendance and engagement today. It's been an inspiring and thought-provoking afternoon. I'd like to thank the conference committee again for all of their input and responding to everything so quickly on the chat as well. And the conference committee members are already busy planning for the virtual conference in March 2021. We will share more details about this over the coming months. Must also thank our keynote speakers again today, and also our sponsors. Your input is greatly appreciated. You'll see in the chat that Teresa has already popped in there the link to the online SurveyMonkey, which will be your evaluation for today. We will very much take on all of your feedback as we're thinking about planning for the virtual conference next year. So do please give as much information as possible, the things that you found have worked well today, and anything that you think might be helpful for the next one. There is also a link in there where there is a pre-made certificate where you just need to pop in your name and then you have your evidence for your CPD log. So I know the conference is usually a favoured opportunity for networking, so we're going to attempt to do that online via Zoom now. So this is an opportunity for everybody to, should you wish. I'd definitely like to invite Emmie and Helen to turn on their cameras so we can see your faces again, and thank you. But thank you all. Look after yourselves, look after each other, and stay safe.